welcome Dr. Vora from Becoit Healthcare. He will be talking to us about the Native American experience, the COVID-19 pandemic in Indian country. Welcome, Dr. Vora, and thank you for joining us. And we'll take you off mute.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. I serve the Mashantucket Pequot tribal nation that's been in existence for over 10,000 years or more on the eastern seaboard of Connecticut, in the state of Connecticut right now. This story is not new to the people of the land. I think the story of the Columbian exchange that brought in infectious diseases and decimated the native population by some accounts up to 80-90% over time is, we believe, partly due to the combination of not just the virus or the disease, but also the virulent policies and disparities that go along with that. So next slide, please. The professor Davis from Yale, who just passed away last year, called it the greatest genocide in terms of the impact on native populations throughout the Americas and the severe impact on the health and actual decimation of the whole people across different nations, different tribes, leading up to, in some extent, even extinction of some people and tribes. So when we have the combination of outbreaks with oppression, it magnifies the impact on vulnerable populations. Next slide, please. This is the map of the current indigenous population that we see in the United States, or what the people that I serve call Turtle Island. And as you can see, for some reason, the Northeast looks empty, and so does the Southeast. And there's a reason for that. When there was initial first contact, there was initial decimation of the tribes that lived in the Northeast, including the Pequots that I serve. And on the Southeast side, Florida, Georgia, that area, the tribes were forcibly relocated to protected Indian territories. And that Trail of Tears had a significant infectious disease component to it. So the virgin soil epidemic theory, where what we are experiencing right now in US, that a novel pathogen arrives and there is no immune response to it, there's no immune memory to it, resulting in massive morbidity and mortality, only partly explains the impact of diseases, pandemics, epidemics on native population over 400, 500 years. Next slide, please. And as some of my colleagues have pointed out before, it is not just that initial historical trauma, but subsequent stressors such as boarding school experiences, dislocation of tribes and children into the mold or the mindset of framing it in our image, so to speak, resulting in perpetuating the adverse childhood experiences with adult experiences causing a vicious cycle, leads to epigenetic changes that we all know results in a higher comorbid condition burden load, as well as a response to new disease within the community. Next slide, please. So as I see this, I look at this current pandemic almost as if it's a magnifying glass. It's a convex lens on the tribes and other vulnerable populations, where it really magnifies the inequities that we all know about and see it, but it also sets off fires by concentrating the impact of the virus and the other associated response or lack thereof to it. Next slide, please. So this is a busy slide, but I had to put in information for these takeaways. If we consider Native American population within each state, for example, in Arizona, 16% of deaths due to COVID are in Native American population, even though the entire population size within Arizona is about less than 5%. If Navajo Nation were to be a separate state, it would be in the top 5 in terms of its mortality rate that we know of. We certainly see that same pattern repeated in New Mexico as well. And this is in the setting where we know that in spite of the treaty obligations, and the trust responsibility for the federal government, the funding for Native American health has been historically low. And who are the people most vulnerable to this pandemic? The elders. And in Native traditions across all cultures, other nations as well, elders hold the key to the oral history, the tribal oral history, the language preservation, and the traditions, and they are at risk for getting lost with the higher mortality seen in that age group. As of just recently, only part of the CARES Act funding that the tribes need has been released, and we are still waiting for the full assistance to arrive. And tribal governments are in severe crisis because of the devastating loss of revenues. Many a times it's not just gaming, but it's also entertainment, hospitality, energy sector as well, besides the other domains of enterprise. Next slide, please. So as the experts in historical trauma, intergenerational trauma in Native communities have framed this, how may we start healing that soul wound beyond the pandemic? And I don't really have a prescription or a blueprint for this just yet, but collectively, I'm sure we can agree that the path forward has to be by beginning to be counted and to be visible. And the census 2020 just happened to be around the same time when the pandemic hit us. So that'll kind of slow down the counting process. How may we promote culturally grounded therapies by building and maintaining trust? Trust is key in Native populations. There's a lot of mistrust because of historical reasons that we know of. How may we start building community level interventions that is designed or co-designed by the people that we serve? And how do we accelerate the decolonization process as we lead through the pandemic and recovery and beyond? And we ensure that social justice and equity is at the forefront of our response and recovery from the pandemic and the fallout that we'll all face. So we are in this together. The tribes have a history of trauma, and the trauma epigenetics is transmitted, but so is the gene and the epigenetics of resilience. So the tribes have seen it before, they have survived in spite of it, and we shall do the same with the COVID pandemic and beyond as well. Thank you very much for your time and the invite, and I look forward to further conversation.